In this video, we shall discuss on how to solve or obtain the independent variable given the regression equation. How do we go about that? First, we need to analyze this regression equation. If we notice, we see this as a dependent variable, while this is the slope. These are the independent variable. That is, y here is the dependent variable. This b naught is our slope. For more on this topic, you need to subscribe to this channel. X1, X2, and X3 are our independent variable. Independent variable. While E is the error term. Is the error term. So, if we are given this regression equation, how do we compute a regression equation that carries three independent variables? That means x1, x2, and x3. So that is what we'll discuss in this video. First, from what is given, we know that y is equal to b and x. So the first thing to do is to take the sum. So if we take the sum of this, we get summation of y is equal to, if we take the sum of a constant, you get n multiplied by that constant plus, we take the sum of this, we have b1 summation of x1 plus b2 summation of x2 plus b3 summation of x3. Let's call this our equation star. Let's call this our equation star. The next thing to do is to make this the subject of formula. That means we have to obtain b naught. So, to obtain b naught, we make this the subject. We make it the subject. So, making this the subject, we move over to this side of the board. For more on this topic, you need to subscribe to this channel. So, making this the subject, we have n multiplied by b naught, which is our slope, will be equal to, the whole of this will move over to this side. So, we'll have summation of y minus b1 summation of x1 minus b2 summation of x2 minus b3 summation of x3. So this is what we'll get. The next thing to do is to divide the whole of this. We need to divide the whole of this by n to obtain our b naught. So we say divide through by n. So when we divide through by n, we have something like this: n into b naught all over n is equal to summation of y all over n minus b1 summation of x1 all over n minus b2 summation of x2 all over n minus b3 summation of x3 all over n. Of course, we note that summation of y all over n is the mean of y. So this can cancel this to give us our b naught, which is our slope, to be equal to the mean of y minus b1 the mean of x1 minus b2 the mean of x2 minus b3 the mean of x3. So this is what we got for our slope, that means b naught. So we succeeded in computing what our b naught is. For more on this topic, you need to subscribe to this channel. So this is our b naught. We now move in. How do we compute this other independent variable? We've gotten our b naught. What do we do? What we do is that we recall from equation star. From equation star, this is our equation star. We have that summation of y is equal to n b naught plus b1 summation of x1 plus b2 summation of x2 plus b3 summation of x3. Of course, since n b naught is known, of course, the whole of this is known. So we can write it over this side. We can write summation of y over this. So move over to this side of the board. For more on this topic, you need to subscribe to this channel. Okay, now we are now writing this here. So we have summation of y to be equal to, since the whole of this is known, we can now write it as b1 summation of x1 plus b2 summation of x2 plus b3 summation of x3. So what we have to do in order to compute a regression equation that has three independent variables, we have to convert the whole of this to a matrix form. And how do we go about that? So we say for our x1, we multiply through. So we have summation of x1 y to be equal to, we now multiply by this, we have b1 summation of x1 squared, because x1 multiplied by this will give us x1 squared plus b2 summation of x1 x2. This multiplied by this will get this plus b3 summation of x1 x3. The second one, x2, you have summation of x2 y to be equal to b1 summation of x1 x2 plus b2 summation of x2 squared plus b3 summation of x2 x3. So this is what we get. Now we go move over to the third one, x3, which is summation of x3 y equal to b1 summation of x1 x3 plus b2 summation of x2, x3 plus b3 summation of x3 squared. So this is what we get. The next thing to do is for we to put the whole of this into a matrix form. We put it into a matrix form, but we should recall that from what we wrote initially, we have y to be equal to bxi, which implies that b1, we have b1, in this case b2, b3, which is also equal to, so we can rewrite the whole of this to give us our b to be equal to x inverse of y. So first, we have to put the whole of this into a matrix form. Then for we to solve for our individual b, we can now use this to solve in a matrix form. So we move over to this other side by converting the whole of this to a matrix form. So put into a matrix form. Put into a matrix form. We move over to the other side of the board. So we move over to this side of the board. We want to put the whole of this into a matrix form. For more on this topic, you need to subscribe to this channel. So putting this into a matrix form, it then means that our x will now be equal to, now we have the whole of this, which is summation of x1 squared, this summation of x1, x2, and summation of x1, x3. Also, here we have summation of x1, x2, summation of x2 squared, summation of x2, x3. Here we have summation of x1, summation of x1, x3, then summation of x2, x3, and summation of x3 squared. So this becomes our x. Then our b can be written as b1, b2, and b3. And our y is summation of x1y, summation of x2y, and summation of x3y. So this is simply how we can compute what we have here, how we can put it into a matrix form. So, how do you also compute this? Is the next thing we'll talk about. So, we succeeded in computing them into a matrix form. Of course, we note that our B now is equal to x inverse y. X inverse y. So, all the values you have here, you can now multiply it with the values you have here using inverse and matrix multiplication. So we move over to this side to find what all of these are. How can you compute them? In case you have a question on this with data, how do you compute them? So we come over to this side of the board. For more on this topic, you need to subscribe to this channel. So we have to write how to compute all of that. It's quite easy. So finally, we have this as the first one. How do you compute that? Summation of x1 squared is equal to summation of x1 squared minus summation of x1 all squared all over n. We have x1 and x2. So we have summation of x1, x2 to be equal to summation of x1, x2 minus summation of x1, x2 all squared all over n. We also have summation of x1, x3, which is summation of x1, x3 minus summation of x1, x3 all squared all over n. So we have this now. We now get this and this and this only because x1, x2 we have it here, x1, x3 we have it here, x1, x2 we have it here. So we look for just 1, 2, and 3. Then we 1, 2, and 3. So summation of x2 squared will be equal to summation of x2 squared minus summation of x2 all squared all over n. We also have summation of x2, x3. So summation of x2, x3 is equal to summation of x2, x3 minus summation of x2, x3 all squared all over n. And lastly, we have summation of x3 squared. So summation of x3 squared will give us summation of x3 squared minus summation of x3 all squared all over n. So this is simply how we can compute all we have here. So if you are looking for how you can compute what you have here, you use this. And why we did not bring out the whole of this is because we have x1, we have x1, x2, which is this. We have x1, x3, which is this. And we have x2, x3, which you have computed, which is also this. So we just got this and this. So this is what we can use if we are given data. This is what we can use to obtain the regression analysis of 3 independent variables. For more on this topic, you need to subscribe to this channel.